Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a source that puts forward a pretty wild idea. What if our understanding of history is fundamentally flawed? Not just a few dates here and there, but entire centuries. And it all begins with this strange, repeating echo in the historical record.
Okay, so let's jump right in. This whole thing kicks off with what, at first glance, just looks like a weird historical coincidence involving two of Europe's most famous emperors.
So check this out. In the year 14 AD, the very first Roman emperor, Augustus, dies. Now you fast forward through the centuries to 814 AD, and Charlemagne, the guy who basically forged the Holy Roman Empire, also dies. The source we're examining here tells us to pay very close attention to the gap between these two huge events.
Yep, an 800-year gap. Exactly. Now, you see that and you think, okay, that's a neat piece of trivia, a fluke, right? But according to this source, that number isn't a coincidence at all. It's a key, and it's the start of a pattern that gets a whole lot bigger and, frankly, a lot stranger.
So, if 800 years is our key, what other doors does it unlock? Well, this is where it really starts to get interesting, because that same 800-year rhythm starts popping up all over the place.
The source lays out this incredible timeline of Rome itself, its precursors and its successors. You have Troy falling to the Greeks. Then, about 800 years later, Rome gets sacked by the Celts. Then another 800 or so years go by, and Rome is sacked by the Goths. And then, wouldn't you know it, 800 years after that, the new Rome, Constantinople, is sacked by the Crusaders. And the source points out the perfect symmetry here. The cycle starts with Greeks winning and ends with so-called Franks, or Western Europeans, beating the Greeks.
And it's not just cities falling. This pattern seems to echo in warfare too. Look at three of the most pivotal conflicts in German history, all centered on the exact same spot, the Teutoburg Forest. First, you've got the Roman legions getting wiped out in 9 AD. Flash forward 800 years, and Charlemagne is fighting his brutal wars against the Saxons right there. And 800 years after that, the 30 Years' War is raging nearby. It's that same 800-year drumbeat, just echoing through time.
Let's just look at one more example, the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain and Portugal. The source highlights three massive shifts in who was in charge. The Romans take over around 100 BC. Then, about 800 years later, it's the beginning of Muslim rule. And finally, almost 800 years after that, the Christian Reconquista is complete. Three foundational moments, all marching to that same strange rhythm.
So, at this point, you kind of have to stop and ask yourself, what is going on here? The source argues that when you stack up this many coincidences, you're forced to consider a far more radical and honestly unsettling possibility.
I mean, can history really be this tidy? Can the rise and fall of empires, the outcomes of major wars, the fate of entire cultures, all just happen to line up in these perfect 800-year intervals all on their own? Or is this symmetry a sign that the story of our past wasn't lived, but written? And this right here, this quote from the source material, really gets to the core of the argument. It's saying that once you see a pattern this obvious, you're not looking at real, messy history anymore. You're looking at fiction. The claim isn't just that history rhymes, it's that our whole timeline might have been intentionally crafted to fit a pre-made template.
Okay, so a claim that huge needs more than just patterns. You need some hard proof. And the source says it has found what it calls a glitch in the matrix, a place where this supposedly constructed story crashes head-on into modern science.
The argument zooms in on two specific periods, separated by, you guessed it, 800 years, the 6th century and the 14th century. And according to the historical texts from back then, these two eras are almost perfect carbon copies of each other, right down to the disasters that struck them.
The parallel is just striking. You've got historical chronicles talking about a warm period in the Roman era that ends in a climate disaster in the 6th century, along with the Justinianic plague. Then, 800 years later, a medieval warm period supposedly ends with a great famine and a temperature drop, immediately followed by the Black Death. On paper, it's a flawless echo. Almost too flawless.
But here is the massive twist. The story we get from those ancient texts seems to completely clash with the story that science tells us today, the story we get from things like ice cores and DNA analysis. The physical evidence appears to contradict the written word.
And here are the contradictions the source presents. First, climate data from physical evidence like ice cores shows only one major cooldown, and it starts in the 1300s. There's no sign of a similar event 800 years earlier. Second, genetic sequencing of the plague bacteria suggests the strains from both epidemics are way too similar for there to be an 800-year evolutionary gap between them. For the author of this theory, this is the smoking gun. It suggests the 6th century catastrophe is a phantom, a fictional copy of the real one in the 14th century.
So all of this leads us to the source's absolutely staggering conclusion, one that really makes you question what the word history even means. So the final takeaway here isn't that history is cyclical. It's that these 800-year cycles are the fingerprints of a forgery. The source suggests that whole centuries of phantom time might have been inserted into our timeline, maybe to give a new empire a fake, ancient history to legitimize itself, or to give powerful institutions a deeper, more orderly past than they really had.
And so, we're going to leave you with that final, provocative question from the source material. It's a question that challenges the very foundation of everything we think we know about our past, and it asks us to think critically about where our stories, our entire history, really came from.